The Israelis are currently lowering dynamite into this tunnel.
And sorry, there's an incoming. Incoming.
Get safe, Douglas.
And he told me, Dad, when you bury me, please bury me with my surfboard. He was a surfer.
I can't stress enough, a ceasefire would return to the situation that led to this. Hamas has said that they will do this again and again. There is no way anyone can live beside that. What that looks like, what the defeat of Hamas looks like, we'll see. But a ceasefire is not the answer to that. And anyone who thinks otherwise should come here and learn something.
Let me ask you, first of all, why have you felt the need to go there?
Well, I've covered every Israeli conflict since the 2006 Lebanon war. I've covered lots of other conflicts as well. And this one is obviously an incredibly important conflict. It's one that is going to be crucial, not just for Israel, but for the region. And I like to see these things firsthand, as you know, Piers.
I do. And I've read your stuff for many years about these kind of conflicts. Let me ask you, what's your feeling on the ground there? I know you've been with some of the IDF. What is your feeling about the motivation for this war from the Israeli side? Is it revenge? Is it something different? What are you picking up?
Well, it's not revenge. I mean, I think the most obvious thing is I spent part of today at the kibbutz of near Oz. This is a kibbutz right down the road from here by the Gaza border, where there are about 400 residents. 80 of them were kidnapped on the 7th of October, and another 30 to 40 were murdered. And I went through the remains of their houses, saw all the blood-spattered walls, and went through the charred remains of that village, that community. That was just one of the massacre sites. I went earlier past the massacre site of what you'll remember there was a music festival, also near the Gaza border, which was taking place where so many hundreds of young people were having a rave and then were massacred, raped, mutilated, and again kidnapped and taken through the border into Gaza. So you see the remnants of that appalling day everywhere around here. It's very hard to find a family anywhere in Israel that hasn't been directly or, very closely related to the atrocities of that day. 1,400 civilians slaughtered in one day and thousands more injured is the sort of thing that will have an effect on any society. It would be roughly comparative to, say, 20,000 people being killed in our own country. So it's a massive thing. It's a massive blow in Israel. The whole nation has felt it. And, of course, people know that there needs to be an answer to this. And I think you can hear behind me as I'm speaking some of that answer, the crump of artillery shells and missiles from the air, it seems. And you can see some of that rising over the border behind me.
Douglas Murray, looking at that footage, I mean, what I think strikes most of us, I think, is just the absolute devastation in Gaza. I mean, it looks like something out of a Hollywood film, a sort of post-apocalyptic scene, and then you see these people queuing up. Tell us what was happening there.
So we got the first footage of the humanitarian corridor that the Israelis have opened. The Israelis have asked the citizens of Gaza, have told them that they should, if they are not Hamas, to move from the north to the south of Gaza. They are trying to make sure that the military fight, which is happening door to door, building by building, is only IDF versus Hamas. Now, of course, that means that a lot of civilians have to move. They are moving. You can see them moving there, and we got the first footage of that happening. Of course, it's a tide of human misery. It goes out saying, although it's a tide of human misery caused by Hamas starting this war on the 7th of October. But yes, we were there and able to watch as the IDF, the Israelis, instructed the locals in how to do this in the most peaceful and easy manner. There were calls out in Arabic and in Hebrew, interestingly enough. The calls in Arabic to the people, and by the way, I should tell about the size of the people we're talking about. 25,000 people the day before I was there, past the way we're seeing, 50,000 people the day before. So the Gazans are following the IDF's recommendations in moving. And of course, to move away from the most intense fighting. Even in this area, of course, it's very dangerous. Hamas have been shooting and rocketing civilians as they retreat, because Hamas wants civilians to remain in the north in order to make the house-to-house fighting as difficult as possible for the Israelis. But it's also, of course, a very dangerous exercise for the IDF, because they don't know who's coming through, and they have to try to make sure that the people coming through are A, not Hamas fighters, let alone leaders, and B, are not Israeli hostages being brought further south into Gaza, and therefore away from the Israelis who are trying to find them. The recommendations come out, the call goes out across the speakers all the time. There's, you can hear in the background, both shelling in the north from the IDF planes, but also routine firefights, anti-tank firings by Hamas, and tanks firing from the IDF, and also a lot of machine gun fire going on all the time in the background in exchanges between the IDF and Hamas. But the main thing that is broadcast out to the Palestinians in the queues is, first of all, in Arabic, you understand what's happening. Please raise your hands. You understand, you're coming through peacefully. This is going to all be done peacefully and as easily as possible. And they go through the checkpoint. Some small number of people, mainly young men, are pulled out for a secondary inspection. These, of course, are the people of the age, who are most likely to be Hamas fighters. They are questioned, they're checked that they don't have guns or other munitions on them. Obviously, the Israelis, among other things, also checking for suicide bombers or anyone else in the line like that. But a second thing, and a detail that's important, is very occasionally a call goes out across the megaphones from the Israelis in Hebrew. And I got one of the soldiers with me to translate what this said. And this said, among other things, if you are a child and you understand what is being said, jump now. And this is because the Israelis believe that Hamas may be using this corridor to smuggle some of the 40 stolen Israeli children south, further into Gaza. And this was a particularly sort of heartbreaking moment, because the idea that a young Israeli child being held by Hamas might be given this warning, this sign of hope, and be able to escape at that moment at the checkpoint is a searing idea. So far, sadly, the IDF has not been able to catch any of the to get back any of the children who Hamas stole last month. As you go into Gaza, you go past the ruins of a small community called Be'eri, which was completely decimated. It was one of the first places that the almost 4,000 Hamas terrorists broke into, and they broke into Israel that day. There's almost nobody left, and it's been cleared, almost no houses. I interviewed a man that you might be able to see the interview shortly, who was from there. He lost his wife and his 14-year-old son. You just hear the horror stories everywhere. I can't tell you. I mean, I've covered plenty of war zones, but the horror stories from these kibbutz, these small communities, which are mainly, by the way, left-wing communities and peacenik communities, people who, there's footage you're watching at the moment of me in the community of Nir Oz. That was a community of 400 people. More than 80 of its residents were kidnapped that day. Around 40 to 50 were murdered, burned alive, or killed in their safe rooms. They had safe rooms ready for rocket attacks, but people didn't ever expect Hamas terrorists to be coming door to door with very well-laid plans of their communities. But that's what happened, and the stories are knowing
exactly who was living there. They'd been given the information by Gaza residents who'd been brought in as workers.
I tell you one thing, Piers, it's very, very obvious when you're here in the period after the massacres of October the 7th. It doesn't matter whether you're right-wing or left-wing. It doesn't matter whether you're a peacenik, like many of the people who were murdered in the kibbutz, or a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu. Nobody in Israel believes that they can live beside Hamas. Nobody.
No. Well, why would you? I mean, Hamas are dedicated in their charter to the eradication of Israel, and they've proven on October the 7th they will kill as many Jewish people as they can get their hands on. And the Hamas spokesman only last week said they want to do what happened on October the 7th again and again and again. You can't do peace with people with that mentality.
I was at one of the trauma hospitals earlier speaking to some survivors of the October attacks. I was very struck particularly by one man in his, I suppose, 40s, 50s. He and his family hid in their safe room, but they didn't lock safe rooms. They couldn't lock because they were for bombs, not for Hamas terrorists coming door to door. His daughter managed to survive. He lost both his legs. He lost his wife, died in front of him and his daughter, and he lost his 14-year-old son. And after this man described what happened when his boy breathed his last, he said, look, I'm a leftist.
I killed my wife and she died. So, and my daughter tried to clean her mouth because we all black. And she told her, Adar, it's done. Don't do it. And I also told Adar, Mommy, she's okay. She must feel nothing now. She's good. Believe me, she's good. And we put her on the floor. And 4 o'clock afternoon, my son, Carmel, 15 years old, you feel that he's not going to survive it. And he starts to breathe, like the short one. And he told me, Dad, when you bury me, please bury me with my surfboard. He was a surfer. He was like a sailor. He liked the sea. And I told him, Carmel, go away. Don't do it.
Absolutely harrowing. I'm absolutely harrowing. Douglas Murray, let me just ask you finally. You've met people like that man lost his wife and his child, and so many people who've lost loved ones, hostages taken, the like. What do you make of MPs, SMPs, some 56 Labour MPs, 10 from the front bench, who've now lost those jobs on the Labour front bench, most of it, by the way, no one had ever heard of, basically defying Keir Starmer and indeed Conservative policy, which is not to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. They called for a ceasefire. They say that is, that is the humanitarian, the right thing to do. What do you make of that vote?
There was a ceasefire, and it was broken by Hamas on the 7th of October when they killed 1,400 Israelis and kidnapped 240, when they led to scenes like the one you saw there. I can't stress enough that people in the kibbutz, people in these communities, you see even on the remainders of their house, on their fridge magnets, peace now, live and let live. These were people who wanted to live by their Gazan neighbors. And people, and often cooperated, drove people to hospital. There's a funeral today of an 80-year-old woman who drove Palestinian children to hospitals. She was an Israeli. She was killed by Hamas. Her funeral is today. They couldn't identify the body until just a few days ago. She was so badly burned. Even
the peace rave near the borders of Gaza, was significantly populated by people who sort of had the peace gig. I mean, that was their belief. That was their view, that they wanted to live in peace with their Palestinian neighbours. I think that one thing that people outside Israel really haven't understood is that it is these people who were disproportionately murdered in their homes on October the 7th. You can see it literally on the signs they have on their fridges and their fridge doors in what remains of their houses. Peace signs, calls for peace. I think that this is so important to realise. And one other thing, many of the Hamas fighters, terrorists, who were found dead or captured alive after that day, were found to have plans on them which had extraordinarily detailed issues about who lived in which house. There are stories of, there's one kibbutz where the man who was in charge of security in the kibbutz, the terrorists went to his house first and killed him and his family, and then went door to door elsewhere. How did they have all of this knowledge, literally family by family, door to door? It was because some of the people they had given their trust to had sold them out, had given information over to Hamas to get them killed. Now, that is going to have, in Israel, a seismic effect in the years ahead. Anyone who thinks that what we heard from Jeremy Corbyn and Len McCluskey is remotely possible is living in a different century to the one we're now in.
Yeah, I just don't think there's a cat and hell's chance of Israel even countenancing doing any kind of peace deal with Hamas, because Hamas are wedded to violence and the eradication of Israel and the Jewish people. I mean, they've made it blatantly clear. It's not something they hide.
They've always made it blatantly clear. They've always made it clear in their actions. You know, and we just all have to take this seriously ourselves. You know, Israel takes it seriously. Some people, maybe some people like the peaceniks I just described, didn't think they really meant it and learned, you know, in the worst way possible that they did. But we have Hamas people in the UK. We have Hamas leaders in the UK we've given sanctuary to. We should also realise these people mean it, Piers. You know, and that if they had the upper hand, if they had their way in the UK, they wouldn't hesitate to do the same thing that their friends did in Israel last month.
I can't stress enough, a ceasefire would return to the situation that led to this. People like that man you just saw me interviewing, he said to me at the end of our interview, he said, I'm a leftist. I've always been a leftist. He said, we cannot live beside these people, by which he and all the others mean we cannot live beside Hamas. Hamas has said that they will do this again and again. There is no way anyone can live beside that. What that looks like, what the defeat of Hamas looks like, we'll see. But a ceasefire is not the answer to that. And anyone who thinks otherwise should come here and learn something.
As for the moral community, I want to make a very, very important point, if I can say so, on this, which is, you know, people quite often abuse history and they say things all the time. I mean, about the only thing anyone from history knows is about the Nazis. Here's something I can tell you with absolute certainty, Piers, having not just seen some of the results of what Hamas did on the ground here in Israel a few weeks ago, but having watched the videos of the unedited footage, which I was one of the journalists who was sadly allowed to see the other day. I can tell you one thing, the comparison between Hamas and the Nazis is insufficient. And sorry, there's an incoming.
Get safe, Douglas.
Come.
Are you okay, Douglas?
It came from the other direction, so... Okay, anyhow, we're okay.
Are you okay?
Let's just... Yeah, it's fine. Sorry, it was a rocket coming. It looked like it was just going to land on us here.
Which way was that rocket coming from? Was it coming from Gaza or from Israel?
Yes, it seemed to be coming from Gaza, so... Yeah, it's fine. It's okay, it's been happening all day. Let me just finish this point, if I may.
Before we go on, Douglas, Atman, how does that make you? How does that make you feel? What just happened there?
I mean, it's I'm a little used to it. I was in Ukraine last year and was in Kherson and Odessa and Mykolaiv, and when the Russians were shelling it, so I'm a little used to it. But just if I can just finish this point, you know, sorry, there's a lot of banging going on, but anyway, we'll keep going.
Well, look, if you need to stop, Douglas, we understand.
No, don't worry. If we need to stop, I'll run to the shelter, I assure you. The thing that struck me, you know, Piers, about seeing the 7th of October footage was that even the Nazis were actually ashamed of what they did. You know, SS battalions who spent their days shooting Jews in the back of the head and pushing them into trenches had to get very, very drunk in the evening to forget what they had done. The Nazi high command famously had to sort of get around the problem of soldier morale, because the soldiers knew this wasn't exactly what their lives were meant to look like either. I tell you one very big difference. If you look at the footage, the raw footage, and I really hope people don't on a wider scale have to view what I viewed the other day, if they see it, they will see something that is at least as barbaric as what the Nazis did. But here's the difference. They did it with glee. They were deeply proud. You see people trying to, taking the head off a young Israeli man with a shovel, and then calling their parents back in Gaza and telling them, "Father, Father, I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands. Get mother on the phone. I want to tell her how great a job her son has done." I come back to this thing. I'm not exaggerating this. It's very, very interesting, and people need to realize. You had this situation with the Nazis, where they also were a genocidal anti-Semitic organization, but they tried to cover their crimes up. Hamas are actually proud of them, and they've said they will do them until the whole world is clear of Jews.
Yeah.
So I suggest we take that seriously, and I think that Israel is taking it seriously. I hope they continue to take it seriously, but I think the world should take it seriously, and that includes Britain. And when I hear British journalists, British commentators, and British politicians lecturing the Israelis on what they should do, I think, I'm sorry, this shows a failing in our country. It shows that we in Britain cannot enforce our laws. We don't even enforce our borders in Britain. It's us that is the weak link in the international security chain on this, not Israel.